Before this night comes to a close, perhaps you are still carrying more than you truly need. Unsettled thoughts. Questions that have not yet found their answers. The soft echoes of a long day lingering somewhere in the background of your mind. We have grown used to living in a state of needing to understand, to keep up, to grasp everything so much so that we forget the human mind, like the body, also needs rest. This video does not come to teach you anything new. It does not ask you to focus, to remember, or to fully comprehend the universe. Instead, it offers a very slow invitation, an invitation to step out of the familiar rush and into another kind of space, one where ideas about the universe, about life, about human consciousness are told gently like a whispered story in the night. Here, the big questions do not need answers. They only need to be set down for long enough so that you can sense the quiet behind them. As Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And perhaps tonight you do not need to stay awake in order to become more aware. You only need to listen and allow yourself to let go. Let this voice accompany you, slowly, softly, and allow the universe to be explained slowly enough that you may drift off somewhere along the way. Night does not ask us who we must become. It does not demand answers. It simply opens very slowly like a door without a sound, so that anyone who is tired may step inside without needing to explain why. If you are listening to these words, perhaps your mind is still carrying the afterimage of a long day, thoughts following one another like stars that refuse to fade. Small but persistent questions repeating themselves: where am I going? What have I missed? And whether there is still something more that needs to be understood. We live in a world that is accustomed to pressing people to understand, to analyze, to answer, as if safety only arrives once everything has been clearly named. But night is different. Night does not operate by obligation. It does not test memory. It does not evaluate understanding. Here, in this moment, you do not need to learn anything at all. You do not need to remember concepts, theories, or grand ideas about the universe. You only need to listen the way one listens to wind moving past a window or to distant waves touching the shore after the body has settled into darkness. To listen without trying to hold on. To listen and then let it pass. Philosophy in this space is not a subject. It is a breath. It is the way human beings have long learned to sit with themselves when the noise of the world begins to soften. There are questions that are not born to be answered, but to be kept company long enough until they no longer weigh so heavily on the heart. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." Yet to reach that quiet place, we do not need to go deeper, think harder, or understand more. Sometimes the only thing required is to stop holding on. The universe we enter tonight is not one that demands alertness. It does not require you to keep up, to picture everything precisely, or to connect every fragment. This is a universe that is vast but not cold, large but not threatening. A space where immensity is not meant to make you feel small, but to remind you that you do not have to carry everything alone. In the night, thoughts often slow down. Not because they disappear, but because they stop competing. They no longer insist on being solved immediately. And when that happens, another kind of understanding begins to emerge, not an understanding of logic, but of acceptance. The acceptance that there are things we do not yet know, and perhaps do not need to know right now. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But tonight, you do not need to illuminate your darkness. You only need to allow it to exist quietly without judgment. Darkness, when it is not resisted, often becomes gentler than we expect. There is a particular fatigue that belongs to modern life, the exhaustion of constantly trying to understand oneself, to name every emotion, to find meaning in every phase, to be certain that one is living correctly. But in this space, you are allowed to set that question down for a while, like placing a heavy bag beside the bed before lying down. Not because it is unimportant, but because you do not need to carry it into sleep. The stories of the universe of life, of consciousness, will arrive very slowly. Not to challenge your intellect, but to soothe the mind. They will not arrange themselves into a complete system. They do not need to lead to a clear conclusion, because sleep does not require completeness. It only needs enough safety for you to soften. Fyodor Dostoevsky once wrote in The Brothers Karamazov, "The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for." But perhaps at night, what we seek is not a reason to live, but a place to rest, a pause that does not demand purpose. A space where you do not need to become better, deeper, or different from who you are right now. And if while listening you realize you have missed a part, that is completely fine. If your thoughts wander, return, and drift again, that too is fine. This video does not require you to follow it from beginning to end. It is simply here like a gentle current so that you may leave at any moment. Tonight, let the universe do what it has always done so well, exist without explanation. And allow yourself to do the same. No answers, no conclusions. Just staying here a little longer until sleep naturally closes the door of consciousness as softly as night opened it in the first place. When the night grows deep enough for the sounds of the outside world to thin and fade, something very natural begins to happen in the human mind. What felt certain during the day starts to soften. Concepts that once stood neatly arranged, right and wrong, true and false, known and unknown, no longer hold their rigid shape. And in that moment, a gentle thought may arise. Perhaps the universe is not entirely the way we were taught it was. We grow up inside models of school, models of science, models of how the world is supposed to work. These models are necessary. They help us orient ourselves, measure reality, and feel safe. But a model, no matter how refined, is only a map. And like every map, it is never the territory itself. It simplifies. It leaves things out. It flattens what is in truth far more complex. Science, at its most beautiful, has never claimed to be the final truth. It is a process, a sequence of hypotheses built, tested, and always ready to be replaced. What is considered true today may tomorrow become only a stepping stone. Not because humans are mistaken, but because reality is always larger than any system designed to contain it. Albert Einstein once wrote with humility, "As our circle of knowledge expands, so does the circumference of darkness surrounding it." It is precisely when understanding grows that we begin to see how much the unknown grows with it. And perhaps the unease many people feel when encountering new ideas about the universe does not come from how strange those ideas are, but from the reminder that certainty was never meant to be permanent. There were ideas once dismissed as madness, models once ridiculed, and over time they became the foundation of how we see the world today. The universe was once thought to be static. Then it was discovered to be expanding. Space was once imagined as an empty stage. Then it became something alive, curved, elastic, shaping time itself. Each time it was not the universe that changed, but the story we told about it. And there is something deeply human in that process. We often forget that the story we are telling is only the latest version, not the final one. During the day, the mind likes to cling to clear conclusions. But at night, when alertness loses its sharp edges, we can allow ourselves to remain with possibilities that have not yet been defined. Here, in this slow and quiet space, you do not need to keep up with scientific debates. You do not need to decide which hypothesis is more correct. You only need to sense one simple truth. Human understanding has edges, and those edges are not failures, they are where curiosity begins. Philosophy recognized this long ago. Socrates left behind no complete system. What he left was an attitude, a willingness to say, "I know that I know nothing," not as a lament, but as an opening. When we stop clinging to absolute certainty, the mind becomes wider, lighter. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "In Beyond Good and Evil, there are no facts, only interpretations." This does not deny reality. It reminds us that every approach to reality passes through the human lens limited by history, language, emotion. And when we see this, a heavy pressure can dissolve the pressure to understand everything correctly. Night does not demand correctness. Night only invites presence. When we allow the universe to be something other than what we were taught, we do not lose our ground. We simply set it down for a moment to see what happens when we are no longer standing on it. And what often appears is a quiet, unfamiliar peace, the peace of not needing to control. Perhaps you have felt the exhaustion of constant updating new knowledge, new discoveries, new truths, as if falling behind meant being left behind. But in this space, there is no ahead or behind, no progress and no regression. Only a very slow current of thought, slow enough that you do not have to struggle to stay afloat. The universe, whether described in equations or metaphors, always exceeds our ability to fully grasp it. And perhaps the deepest comfort philosophy offers is not in providing answers, but in allowing us to live alongside questions without anxiety. Martin Heidegger once suggested that the most thought-provoking thing in an age of thought is that we have forgotten how to think, how to remain with what is unclear, how to listen instead of conclude. At night in stillness, we can practice this again, not as an intellectual effort, but as a state of rest. And if while listening you notice that you are no longer following every idea, that is not failure. It is a sign that the mind has begun to do what it needs to do: let go. Science will continue to change. Models will continue to be redrawn. New hypotheses will appear, then give way. But you in this moment do not need to move with all of those shifts. You only need to be here in a universe wide enough to ask nothing of your understanding. And when you allow yourself not to know, without hurry, without fear, sleep often arrives naturally as a continuation of that acceptance. Let the story continue to drift. No need to grasp, no need to conclude. For understanding, like the night, always has its boundaries, and it is precisely at those boundaries that rest becomes possible. After allowing the thought that the universe might be different from what we were taught, another door opens, slower, deeper, and gently disorienting. Not because it is loud or dramatic, but because it introduces a possibility strange enough to soften whatever certainty still remains. What if the universe we are living in actually exists inside something else? What if all the stars, the vast spaces, the slow rhythms of time are merely the interior of a larger structure, like the inside of a black hole? This idea is not new, nor is it presented as a truth. It exists as a hypothesis at the edge where science brushes against philosophy, and philosophy fades into silence. There nothing is asserted. Things are simply told, like a story whispered at the bedside, close enough to hear, distant enough that belief is unnecessary. In the popular imagination, black holes are often tied to fear places where light cannot escape, where everything collapses inward. But when we slow down and set aside the dramatic imagery, a black hole carries a strange kind of calm. It does not attack, it does not chase. It simply exists, quiet, deep, and enclosed. And because of that, when the idea of a universe within a universe arises, the feeling is not quite panic, but a gentle confusion. If the universe is a black hole, then what is outside? If there is an event horizon for everything we can observe, then what lies beyond it? Not for us to cross, but for us to accept as a boundary that cannot be passed. Here the question is not meant to find an exit. It only invites us to sit with the thought that all our experience may be unfolding within a closed space that does not feel like a prison, like a dream that exists entirely within the mind, while the dreamer remains unaware of its borders until waking. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. If we replace language with perception, we can sense something similar. The limits of perception are also the limits of the world we know, not because the world is smaller, but because we stand at a very particular point of view." The idea of the universe as a black hole does not say that we are trapped. It merely suggests that our notions of inside and outside, of beginning and end, may not function the way human intuition expects them to. And when intuition loosens its grip, a space opens not to be filled, but to rest within. Philosophy has long been familiar with such spaces, places without clear answers, yet strangely comforting. Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." Placed beside the image of the universe as a black hole, this thought becomes especially gentle. For if the universe does not need to be solved, then neither do we, at least not tonight. There is something deeply soothing in imagining that everything we see, stars, galaxies, living rhythms, unfolds within a space closed enough to protect, wide enough not to suffocate. Like the dark room where we sleep separated from the outside world, yet never experienced as loss. And if this thought leaves you feeling slightly unsteady, that is fine. Not because it is too large, but because it invites us away from the habit of needing to understand. During the day, we often seek safety in naming everything. At night, safety may come from allowing the unnamed to exist. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote briefly, "In the gay science, when you stare into the abyss stares back at you." But perhaps here the abyss does not stare back with threat. It simply reflects our own silence. And when we are no longer required to respond, that silence can become a place of shelter. From the previous part, where we accepted that understanding always has limits, this section continues the flow naturally. If there are limits, then there is something beyond them, not to be crossed, but to remind us that not everything needs to be approached. Some regions of reality exist only to show us the boundaries of control, and in doing so, help us let go. At night, as the body begins to soften, the mind often seeks images large enough for small worries to dissolve within them. The image of the universe as a black hole, deep, dark, still, can do just that. You do not need to believe it. Only allow it to drift through the mind like a slow-moving cloud. If you notice that you are no longer following every word, that is a good sign. It means thought has begun to turn into background. It means consciousness is no longer working as it does by day, but is settling like a lake at night. The universe may be a black hole, or it may not. But in this moment, that does not matter. What matters is the permission not to know. The permission to remain inside a strange idea without defense. The permission to let confusion become a thin blanket, warming not through explanation, but through acceptance. Let this thought close very softly, like a door shutting without a sound. And when it closes, the night remains, the universe remains, and you remain very still inside a space wide enough for sleep to arrive on its own without being named, without needing to know why. When the idea that the universe might exist inside a larger structure has gently closed, another question appears, not sharp, not insistent, but soft like darkness slowly spreading across the ceiling. If there is an inside, is there also an outside? And if there is an outside, does it end anywhere at all? From there, the human imagination drifts toward a very ancient image. Turtles stacked upon turtles, one layer supporting the next with no clear final point, only continuation. That image was once told as a folktale, sometimes even as a joke. But at night, when there is no need to defend an argument, we can allow it to return as a gentle metaphor. It does not explain the universe. It soothes the need for explanation. An infinite chain of begetting where each layer exists, not to answer the one below it, but simply to continue the story. If space truly operates this way, born from birth, opening from opening, then the question of a first beginning may lose its daytime weight. In an infinite sequence, a start is not required for a continuation. Like a lullaby, we do not need to know when the first note was written. We only need to let the slow rhythm carry us. Philosophy touched this feeling very early. Aristotle in metaphysics suggested that chains of causes could not extend infinitely in certain ways. And yet philosophy itself over centuries learned how to live alongside that paradox. Not to reject logic, but to acknowledge that logic too has edges, and beyond those edges lies experience. Blaise Pascal once left a quiet sentence in Pensées. The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me. But that fear, when placed into the night, can transform into something else, not panic, but humility. When we stop trying to stand at the center, infinity no longer confronts us as a challenge. It becomes a wide ground upon which small worries can be set down. The current of thought from the previous parts continues naturally here. If understanding always has limits, and if what we observe may only be part of a larger structure, then the need to find an endpoint begins to soften. The question, where did everything begin, yields to a gentler one. Do I need to know this in order to be at peace? At night, the body begins to relax into a rhythm it has known for a very long time, the rhythm of rest. And if the mind is allowed, it can do the same. In that state, the idea of a nested universe without a final point becomes not a problem, but a hammock. It sways softly just enough for tension to slip from the hands. Soren Kierkegaard once wrote in concluding unscientific postscript, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." In this context, the sentence feels like a gentle reminder. Fully understanding the entire chain may be impossible, but being present in this moment is always possible. And at night, that moment asks for no purpose. Perhaps we are tired not because the universe is too large, but because we keep trying to place a period at the end of it. We keep searching for an absolute foundation on which to stand. But if the foundation is infinite, then stillness becomes an option. We can sit down, lie back, and allow the chain of continuation to exist without our intervention. The image of turtles stacked upon turtles carries a very soft humor, as if the universe were smiling at the seriousness of human effort. And that smile is not mocking. It simply reminds us that not every question needs to be completed. Some questions exist to open space for rest. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. If we release the power that insists on conclusion, we may choose a different interpretation, one that helps us sleep more deeply. In that interpretation, infinity does not threaten, it holds. And if the universe is an infinite chain of begetting, then your life, brief, fragile, unmistakably specific, is not swallowed by it. It is placed exactly where it belongs, a link small enough not to bear the whole weight, yet real enough to feel the warmth of being. It does not need to become a foundation for anything. It only needs to be itself." From the previous part, where the idea of the universe as a black hole softened the need to cross beyond boundaries, this part continues by softening the need to find an endpoint. The two currents meet in a very quiet place, the acceptance that not knowing is not a lack. It can be a form of deep rest. If while listening you feel your thoughts slow down or even dissolve, that is natural. Like gazing at the night sky long enough that the stars are no longer separate points of light but become a single calm darkness. And within that darkness, sleep often arrives without invitation. Nested universes. No final point. Those words do not need to be understood. They only need to be set down like a small stone placed in a pocket before lying down. Not to carry into dreams, but to know that you no longer have to hold it. When the question of beginnings is released, a space opens not empty but wide enough for your breath to slow. Let the current continue very gently. No need to determine direction, no need to mark milestones. Simply allow the night to do what it has always done, link moments together, without requiring an end until sleep closes every thought as softly as a turtle quietly supporting the layer above it, without asking to be seen. As the thought of a universe nested within another universe slowly settles like the final wave dissolving into the night sand, another familiar story quietly emerges, one most of us have heard before, but rarely told at a pace slow enough to truly feel. The Big Bang. A name that sounds like an explosion, like fireworks tearing through darkness. But if we set the drama aside, if we lower our voice just a little, the story may not be about an explosion at all. It may be about an opening. There was no echo, no epicenter, no central point we can point to and say, everything began there. Instead, there was something far stranger, a moment in which distance itself began to appear between all things simultaneously everywhere. Space did not burst outward from a single spot. Every point simply began to move away from every other point. Like the universe's first breath, quiet, unannounced, uninterested in impressing anyone, just a very slow widening of existence. When we describe the Big Bang as an explosion, we quietly impose a familiar human way of thinking onto the universe, a clear cause, a definite beginning, a sharp separation between before and after. But at night, when thought loses its urgency, we can allow another telling one that does not force the universe to resemble our stories. No center means no privileged position. No clear beginning means no moment we must cling to. Stephen Hawking once wrote in A Brief History of Time, "The universe doesn't allow perfection. And perhaps within that imperfection, the ambiguity of beginnings, the absence of an absolute starting point, the universe becomes gentler toward us. It does not pose a question we must answer correctly. If the Big Bang was an opening, then it did not only open space, it opened possibility, it opened time. It opened paths whose destinations no one could foresee. In this telling, the universe is not an event completed long ago, but a process still unfolding right now within every quiet stretch of distance, still growing between the stars." There is something deeply comforting in this image. For if the universe did not begin with a shock, then our own existence does not need to be justified by an extraordinary moment either. We are the result of a long, slow opening, one that was never in a hurry to prove anything. Eastern philosophy has long been familiar with this rhythm. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao." Applied to the story of the Big Bang, the reminder becomes clear. Any story we tell about origins is only a gesture toward what cannot be fully spoken. And this does not make the story weaker. It makes listening less tense. From the earlier parts where we loosened our grip on beginnings and endings, the story of the Big Bang follows naturally. If there is no final point, then there is no need for a perfect starting point either. If the universe is a continuous opening, then the Big Bang is not a door closed behind us, but a door still opening very gently in every moment. By day, the human mind tends to favor fireworks, bright, explosive, easy to remember. By night, the mind leans toward images more like breath. Inhale, space expands. Exhale, everything settles. There is no absolute beginning in a breath, only rhythm. When the universe is told as breath, it stops being a puzzle. It becomes a rhythmic ground we can rest within. No need to understand the equations. No need to imagine the entire cosmic history. Only the sense that everything is opening and that we are inside that opening. Martin Heidegger once wrote in Being and Time, "Being is not something that can be grasped. Perhaps the Big Bang is the same. Not something to seize, but something to remain with. And at night, when the urge to possess knowledge fades, we can remain with the story in a different way, quietly, without defense. You may have felt pressure when thinking about beginnings, the beginning of the universe, the beginning of a life, the beginning of important decisions. But if a beginning is not a point, but a process of opening, that pressure begins to dissolve. There is no need to identify the right moment. No need for an explosion to justify existence. Told slowly, the Big Bang becomes a whisper. Everything began by making more space. Space to exist, space to change, space to be wrong and continue anyway. And perhaps what we need at night is not more answers, but more space, like this space in the mind, where thoughts can stretch and stop colliding. If while listening you notice that you are no longer following the thread of the story, that is perfectly fine. Like breath, this story does not need to be counted. It only needs to happen. The universe opens, without noise, without a center, without a single moment to call the beginning. And within that opening, you are also allowed to open a little, and then slowly close in the way sleep does. Not as a shutdown, but as a very gentle change of state. Night continues. The universe continues. And consciousness, like space after the Big Bang, expands just enough for you to drift into sleep peacefully, without fireworks, needing only one slow, quiet breath. As the story of the Big Bang closes like a breath just released, a very subtle feeling remains, the sense that nothing is truly still, even as you lie motionless in the night. From that opening, another realization begins to surface. There are forces constantly at work quietly without ever needing to be seen. They do not speak. They do not ask for attention. And yet they are what keep the universe from falling apart, what hold the stars in their places, and what keep your body right now breathing in a steady rhythm. Science calls them the fundamental forces of nature, names that sound technical, distant. But if we peel away the academic language, what remains is a simple truth. Reality is supported by things we never directly touch. Gravity does not need to be seen to draw you toward the bed. Electromagnetism does not need to be heard for the soft light to rest on the ceiling. These forces are present not as main characters, but as background music, always there whether we notice them or not. By day, we tend to focus on what appears before our eyes shape color movement. But at night, when light softens and the senses grow less busy, we can feel a deeper layer of the world, the layer of invisible influence. Things that do not need to perform in order to exist. And in that layer, the universe reveals a different face, quiet, patient, and uninterested in human validation. Albert Einstein once wrote, "The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible." Perhaps that is what makes the universe feel both close and distant at once. We understand a part of it enough to name a few fundamental forces, and yet precisely as we understand, we also touch another boundary where new questions begin. Are the forces we know all that exist, or are they only the opening notes of a much longer composition? The thought of unknown forces does not have to create unease. In this slow, gentle space, it can offer something else, the feeling of being supported by something larger than one's capacity to comprehend. Like sleeping inside a solid house without knowing its full structure, without understanding where every beam stands, only knowing that it holds you safely. Philosophy has long been familiar with hidden layers of reality. Plato in the Republic spoke of the cave where humans mistake shadows for the real forms. But the story was never meant to alarm us about ignorance. It invites us to recognize that what we see is not all that exists. And at night, when the need to separate right from wrong loosens, this recognition can become a lullaby. From the previous part where the universe was described as a slow unfolding, this section continues by settling even deeper. If the Big Bang was the opening of space, then these silent forces are the invisible threads that keep that opening from becoming chaos. No center, no commander. Only balance unfolding in silence. There is something deeply healing in knowing that the world does not depend on our attention in order to function. That even when we are tired, when we let go, when we drift into sleep midway through a thought, these forces continue their work without complaint, without demand. They allow us to rest. Carl Jung once wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order." Perhaps these silent forces are that secret order. Not a rigid structure, but a gentle regulation. And when we allow ourselves to trust that regulation, even just for the night, some tension in the mind can dissolve. When seen deeply enough, reality is not a collection of separate objects, but a network of influence. Every small movement is connected to others in ways we do not need to track. And within that network, humans are not the center, but neither are we abandoned. We are held within something larger, more delicate, and more enduring than daily worries. At night, as the body shifts into its resting rhythm, forces within you are also working quietly. The heart adjusts its pace, the lungs slow the breath. The brain rearranges fragments of memory. You do not command them, you only allow them. And that permission is the key to sleep. Ludwig Wittgenstein once said in Philosophical Investigations, "What we cannot speak about we must pass over in silence." Perhaps the silent forces of the universe belong to that domain, the domain of quiet, not because they are unimportant, but because they do not need to be spoken to fulfill their role. And night, with all its gentleness, is the right time for us to do the same: speak less, think less, and try less to control. If there are forces we do not yet know, that does not make the world more fragile. It makes it wider. And within that wideness, we do not need to stand upright. We can lie down. We can soften. We can allow reality to support us rather than the other way around. The stream of thought continues unhurried. From the opening of the Big Bang to the forces that keep everything from dissolving into chaos, all of it meets in a very quiet place. Reality is deeper than what the senses touch, and we do not need to dive to the bottom to prove it. It is enough to feel the calm of knowing that something is working on our behalf. If right now your eyelids feel heavier and your thoughts begin to slow, it is not because you have understood something new. It is because you have allowed yourself not to understand. Those silent forces of the universe, of the body of the night, are doing the rest. Let them continue. No need to follow, no need to name. Just lie still in a world supported by invisible things and allow sleep to arrive as the natural result of that quiet trust. After allowing the thought that the universe is held together by silent forces beyond our senses, a very subtle shift occurs in how we look at our own home. Not sudden, not dismissive, just an old assumption loosening its grip. What if Earth is not as special as we have long believed? Not chosen, not central. Simply a survivor, accidental, fragile, and still breathing. By day, the story of Earth is often told with pride. The blue planet, the cradle of life, our only home. These words matter because they remind us to protect what we have. But at night, when the need to affirm softens, we can tell another story, not to diminish Earth's value, but to place it in the proper scale of the universe. If the universe is vast enough that numbers lose their meaning, then the possibility of many worlds like ours is no longer shocking. There may have been planets with water, with atmospheres, with their own first dawns. There may have been promising beginnings and then slowly quiet endings, not through failure, simply through changing conditions. In that larger picture, Earth is not the winner. It is the one that remains. The idea of a survivor carries a different silence than the idea of being chosen. It is not proud. It does not demand perfection. It simply says this: what exists has passed through countless unseen crossroads. And because of that, it deserves care, not because of destiny, but because of fragility. Philosophy has long helped us grow familiar with this humility. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Observe constantly that all things take place by change, and accustom yourself to consider that the nature of the universe loves nothing so much as to change the things which are, and to make new things like them." When we place Earth within that current of change, we do not lose meaning. We find a softer kind of meaning, the meaning of still being here. There may have been countless worlds like ours, and if so, the notion of failure in the universe loses its moral weight. It is not judgment, it is description. Ecosystems that did not endure, atmospheres that thinned away, orbits that slowly drifted. No tragedy in the human sense, only process. And within that process, Earth continues for now, no more, no less. Heard slowly enough, this thought can bring a deep comfort, because if we are not chosen, we do not carry the burden of having to be worthy. We only need to care for what exists day by day, night by night. From the previous part, where invisible forces quietly sustained reality, this section follows as a gentle step back. If those forces do not operate for humanity, then Earth's existence is not for humanity either. And realizing this strangely makes breathing easier. The pressure of being the center dissolves. We can be a part important enough to love, small enough not to strain. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart." When we see Earth as a survivor, the line takes on another tone. Life does not need to win in order to matter. Continuing amid changing conditions is already enough. At night, when we look at the sky, a sense of smallness often appears. But small does not mean meaningless. It only reminds us that meaning does not come from being central, but from relationship, from how we touch one another, from recognizing fragility and still choosing care. If there have been worlds like ours that thought does not make Earth less precious, it makes this moment denser, like knowing a sunset will not last, and therefore watching it more slowly, like knowing a song will end, and therefore listening more deeply. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Perhaps the universe is full of such attempts at birth, not all of them successful in the way we might hope, but each attempt leaves a trace. And Earth in all its imperfection is a living trace. When stripped of human emotion, the idea of failure in the universe becomes very gentle. It allows us to accept that not every beginning needs a brilliant ending. Some endings simply dissolve into the background, and that does not make the story less beautiful. It makes it true. From here, the stream of thought continues naturally. If Earth is not special in a central sense, then humans do not need to carry an oversized role either. We can be temporary caretakers knowing we do not own, only tend. And within that awareness, there is a deep relief we are allowed to love without possessing. If now you feel your heart slowing, it is not because the story has reached a conclusion. It is because it has loosened an invisible burden, the burden of having to prove our specialness, the burden of being worthy of a destiny. Earth may not be as special as we once believed, and precisely because of that, it becomes more lovable. Like a survivor who does not boast. Like a home that keeps its door open at night, allowing you to lie down and listen to the world breathing without promises of eternity, only the quiet assurance that tonight is still gentle. And within that gentleness, sleep often arrives naturally, like a very light act of trust in this simple truth. Being here now is already enough. As the thought that Earth is merely a survivor settles like the last wave withdrawing from the shore, a wider picture slowly comes into view without noise, without drama. Worlds that once had a chance. Not abandoned tragedies, but possibilities that opened for a time, then quietly closed, following the universe's own rhythm. Here, the story does not need a climax. It only needs to be observed. There were planets where water once flowed across the surface, places where atmospheres were once thick enough to hold warmth, orbits that remained stable long enough for something fragile to try to appear. When told slowly, these traces do not evoke a sense of loss. They carry a very particular stillness, like looking at old stone steps, knowing someone once passed through without needing to know who they were. The universe does not remember the way humans remember. It does not regret. It simply continues. The idea that life is not destiny but temporary fortune can sound cold when spoken quickly. But at night, when we allow the voice to soften, the idea becomes gentle. Fortune carries no obligation. It does not demand permanence. It only says this happened long enough to be touched, long enough to be felt. Philosophy has long touched this gentleness. Epicurus wrote in letter to Menocius, "Accustom thyself to believe that death is nothing to us, not to deny the value of life, but to free it from the burden of needing to be eternal." Applied to the universe, the thought shifts slightly. An ending does not negate the meaning of having existed. From the previous part where Earth was seen as one that remained, this section follows naturally. If there were worlds once like ours, then life does not stand on a pedestal. It stands alongside other possibilities, able to sprout, able to fade without promise. And because of that, it does not need to be turned into tragedy. By day, humans often tell stories in terms of winning and losing, success and failure. But the universe does not use that language. It does not keep score. It simply allows conditions to meet and observes what happens. Like a vast garden, where not every seed takes root, and where that does not make the garden less beautiful. There is a deep calm in looking at worlds that once had a chance in this way. No pity, no regret, only acknowledgement. Like looking at a fallen leaf, knowing it was once green, once attached to the branch, and now lies still in darkness, completing its final work. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "Should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee?" The line may sound ironic, but at night it becomes a gentle reminder. Meaning does not need to be grand. Sometimes a very small choice to continue or to stop is enough to fill a moment. And for those planets, that moment may have passed, quietly, without farewell. When we do not dramatize, we do not make the story poorer, we make it more honest. The universe does not mourn closed possibilities, nor does it celebrate open ones too loudly. It moves according to conditions, not emotions. And within that movement, there is a strange kind of fairness, no favoritism, no demand. From here, a very soft thread appears between the universe and human life. How many worlds exist within each of us, paths that once had a chance, then turned another way, possibilities that opened, then closed, not through failure, but through timing. When we look at planets that once had water without tragedy, we also learn to look at ourselves more gently. Carl Jung once wrote, The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. Acceptance is not only accepting what is, but also accepting what once could have been and did not become, without blame, without judgment, simply recognition. At night, as the body slows, the mind can also learn to observe without intervening. Images of distant planets with water, with atmospheres then without drift past like faint points of light. No need for names, no need for detailed histories, only the sense that the universe is wide enough to hold both emergence and closure. And if life is temporary fortune, then tonight the fact that you are here breathing, listening is also a temporary fortune. It does not need to be turned into a mission. It does not need a grand meaning. It only needs to be a quiet moment supported by conditions that are fragile yet stable enough for you to rest. From this current, we move forward very gently. No sharp transition, only the understanding that observing without judgment is a form of healing for the universe, for Earth, for oneself. When we do not force the story to have a climax, we allow it to lull us into sleep. Worlds that once had a chance. No need for mourning. No need for conclusions. Only the knowing that in this moment you are on a planet whose door is still open, and that door is quiet enough for you to lie down. Night does not ask you to hold the story. It only invites you to observe, then let go. And when you let go very slowly, sleep often arrives as a natural consequence of that calm, as gently as the universe itself continues unhurried, uninterrupted. As the image of worlds that once had a chance slowly fades like distant lights slipping away behind half-closed eyelids, another thought lingers longer, not heavy but deep enough to slow the rhythm of breath. Life, wherever it appears, is always a fragile experiment, not because it is weak in a pessimistic sense, but because it unfolds within a universe not designed to favor it. Time continues, physics continues, and life, when it emerges, must find its own way to remain moment by moment. We often speak of life as if it were a given, simply because it is happening around us. But at night, when everything softens, we can look at it from a gentler distance. Life is not the universe's default state. It is an exception, a chain of conditions meeting at the right time and the right balance for long enough. And when even one of those conditions shifts, the chain can break quietly without warning. Not every beginning continues. Not every seed becomes a tree. Not every heartbeat lasts. Spoken quickly, this thought can sound unsettling, but spoken slowly, it brings a calm clarity. When we realize that life is not guaranteed, we no longer need grand promises in order to love it. We can value what is here now without forcing ourselves into optimism. Philosophy has approached this fragility in many voices. In Being and Nothingness, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Existence precedes essence." At night, this can be heard as a very gentle reminder. Life does not need a finished essence in order to begin. It only needs to exist first, and then, if time allows, it may slowly find its form. From the previous part where we observed openings and closures without tragedy, this section continues the flow by placing life at the center of the process. Not to glorify it, but to see it clearly. Life is fragile before time because time does not pause for anything. It is fragile before physics because laws do not adjust themselves to hope. And strangely, it is within this fragility that life becomes intimate, real. It does not need infinite duration to have value. A morning, a deep breath, a quiet moment. These small things do not require guarantees from the future. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years, not as a warning, but as a gentle release." When we stop leaning on distant horizons, the present becomes clearer. Not brighter, just clear. By day, people often seek comfort and optimism. Everything will be fine, every effort will be rewarded. But at night, there is another kind of comfort, one that does not promise anything. A comfort that comes from knowing that not every story needs a perfect ending to be worth telling. That continuing even briefly, even uncertainly, is enough. Albert Camus wrote in The Plague, "The struggle against suffering itself is enough to fill a human heart. When placed beside the fragility of life, the sentence becomes gentle. Meaning does not require victory over time. Remaining even for a while is already a form of courage. Life is an experiment, and like all experiments, it carries no guarantee of success. Yet this does not diminish its worth. It deepens it. When we stop forcing ourselves into artificial optimism, we can cherish the present more softly, not from fear of loss, but from the quiet knowledge that being here at all is rare. There is a strange freedom in this awareness, Freedom from the pressure to optimize life. Freedom from comparing length scales completions, like watching a flower bloom at night without asking how long it will last. Simply seeing it and letting the feeling settle. From here, a thin thread forms between life in the universe and life within each person. Unfinished plans, paths that began then turned another way. Not every beginning continues, and that does not have to mean failure. Sometimes it is only that conditions changed. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, but at night we do not need to excavate that pain. We only need to acknowledge that life in its fragility often carries feeling and allow that feeling to exist without rushing to fix it." As the body grows heavier and thoughts slow, you may notice that the life within you is also adjusting. The heart finds an easier rhythm, the breath deepens, the mind releases its forecasts. No grand plan is required for sleep. Only permission. The current of thought remains soft. From worlds that once had a chance to life as a fragile experiment, everything meets in a quiet place, valuing the present without forced optimism. No need to say that everything will be fine. Only the knowing that right now things are calm enough to rest. If while listening you realize you are no longer following the thread that is good, it means the story has stopped being an argument and has become a background. It means you no longer need to hold on. Life is fragile, and precisely because of that, it deserves a gentle touch. Let that thought be set down very slowly, like placing something thin upon the surface of water, not sinking, making no sound. And within that stillness, sleep may arrive not as a reward, but as a natural continuation of allowing life to be what it is, unguaranteed, undramatic, yet real enough for you to release your as. The thought of life as a fragile experiment slowly settles. Something very close begins to come into view, so close that we often overlook it. The human body, not as an object to be used, not as a machine to be repaired, but as a small universe quietly operating here in this very night. And when we look slowly enough, gently enough, the body no longer feels like something to control. It becomes a story being told continuously, patiently, without needing an audience. There are truths about the body that may sound strange at first, yet are completely ordinary. Cells renew themselves. Each heartbeat adjusts on its own. Each breath enters and leaves without waiting for instruction. Even while you sleep, the body remains busy repairing, sorting, organizing. Like a city at night, quieter but never truly stopped. By day, we usually experience the body through urgent signals, fatigue, pain, tension, hunger. At night, as the light softens, the body can speak in another language, the language of rhythm. Slow rhythm, repeating rhythm. A rhythm that does not ask to be explained. And within that rhythm, we may notice that the body is not merely where we live. It is a living ecosystem. Inside you are trillions of small beings, bacteria, cells, structures, coexisting, cooperating, competing, adapting. There is no single command center, no overarching consciousness issuing orders to every part. And yet life continues. A gentle order emerges from countless small interactions. Seen this way, the body becomes a miniature map of the universe, no center required to function, no absolute control needed to endure. Philosophy has long sensed this connection. Baruch Spinoza wrote in Ethics, "The human mind is part of the infinite intellect of God." Whether or not we use religious language, the sentence carries a soft feeling. Mind and body are not separate from the whole. They are local expressions of a wider movement, biological, physical, cosmic. From the previous part, where life was seen as fragile yet real enough to cherish, this section continues by bringing that fragility into you. Not to create worry, but to ease it. For if the body, with all its complexity, continues on its own, even when you are not paying attention, then perhaps you do not need to strain so hard to make everything okay. There is a quiet beauty in the connection between biology and the cosmos. Both operate through rhythm and relationship, not command. Stars form through gravity and time. Bodies form through molecules, energy, and repetition. No event stands alone. No part is fully independent. And within this understanding, human loneliness can soften. Not because there is someone else, but because there is more connection. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy. At night, this is not a challenge to the intellect, but an invitation to return to the feeling of breath, to the weight of the body resting on the bed, to the heartbeat that needs no reason. When listened to long enough, the body does not ask who you must become. It asks only, this will you allow me to do my work?" And that work is simple to keep you alive long enough for you to rest. No additional goals, no extra effort. There is a very quiet kind of healing in seeing the body as a small universe. For if the vast universe does not need a center, then you do not need to be the center of every decision either. You can share the weight of existence with your own body. Let it breathe for you. Let it keep rhythm for you. Let it continue while you release. Carl Jung once wrote, "The body is the unconscious mind." Heard at night, the sentence can be taken gently. The body knows more than we think. It knows when to rest, when to slow down, when to release a thought we keep trying to hold. And sleep in this sense is not a shutdown, but a quiet dialogue between layers of yourself. If the universe operates through invisible forces, if life is a fragile experiment, then the body is where all of that touches ground. Here, now, not abstract, not distant. A deep breath, a small shift of position, a warmth spreading as muscles soften. From the flow of the earlier parts where we learn to observe without judgment, this section continues with a very simple accenting. No need to understand anatomy, no need to name systems. Only the awareness that inside you a universe is working quietly without drama, yet stable enough to be trusted. If your thoughts begin to dissolve now, it is not because you have fully understood the link between biology and the cosmos. It is because you have stopped standing outside to analyze and begun to be inside to feel. And that is where sleep often finds you. The human body, a small universe, no map required, no instructions needed. Only allow it to continue while you rest. As stars continue to burn without being watched, as the universe continues to open without explanation. And within that gentle harmony, sleep can close your awareness, not suddenly, not by force, but as a natural attunement between you and the world, breathing alongside you very slowly, very quietly. Self into the night, peacefully. As the sense of the body as a small universe settles into balance, as the breath finds its own depth, as your weight is held by the bed without effort, another state quietly appears. Sleep, not as a switch being turned off, not as disappearance, but as a very ancient transition, one that existed long before humans learned to ask questions about it. We often say going to sleep as if it were an act of leaving consciousness, leaving the world, leaving ourselves. But when seen slowly, gently, sleep is not a withdrawal at all. It is a transfer from one way of being to another, like light turning into darkness, not through a break, but through a long, soft gradient we call dusk. In sleep, nothing truly stops. The heart continues to beat. The lungs continue to breathe. The brain remains active, but in another language. Inner space is open, where memories are rearranged, emotions softened, and the fragments of a long day find a place to rest. Sleep is not doing nothing. Sleep is doing what cannot be done while awake. By day, consciousness operates through focus, distinction, control. By night, the brain releases these mechanisms and shifts into another rhythm, a rhythm of connection, integration, healing. And within this transition, something essential happens. You no longer have to be the one in charge. You are allowed to be cared for. Philosophy sensed this difference long ago. Aristotle distinguished between potentiality and actuality. Sleep in a very gentle sense is where potential is preserved rather than exhausted. Not everything needs to be realized immediately. Some possibilities need rest so that tomorrow can exist. Sleep is an ancient act of survival, older than language, older than civilization. Our ancestors learned to sleep in rhythm with night, with darkness, with temporary safety. Sleep was not a luxury. It was a condition for continuing to live. And within your body today, that evolutionary memory remains intact. Each time you sleep, you repeat a very old gesture, trusting that the world is safe enough for vigilance to loosen. From the previous part, where the body was seen as a self-regulating ecosystem, sleep appears as the moment when that ecosystem is allowed to work most fully. Undisturbed by thought, unburdened by goals, unforced to understand. Simply the pure functioning of life in darkness. There is a very modern anxiety tied to sleep, the fear that if we do not control things, everything will slip away. But sleep exists to show the opposite. Even when you are not in control, life continues. And realizing this may be one of the deepest comforts available to us. Carl Jung once wrote, "In sleep, the unconscious speaks more openly." Not to frighten us, but to remind us that there are layers of ourselves accessible only when consciousness steps back. Sleep is the doorway to those layers, quietly, without coercion. Sleep is not the loss of the self. It is a return to another form of self, one that does not need to define who it is. No roles, no narrative. Just being in the rhythm the body and brain have remembered for a very long time. At night, many people fear sleep because they fear losing control. But beneath that fear is not sleep itself, it is trust. Trust that one can let go. Trust that not everything collapses when observation stops. And so as you lie here listening, allowing sleep to arrive slowly, you are practicing a very quiet kind of courage. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time that humans often forget their finitude by filling time with activity. Sleep reminds us of the opposite. Finitude is not something to escape. It is what makes rest possible. When we accept the finitude of consciousness that it needs to pause, we accept the true rhythm of existence. Sleep does not erase today, it transforms it. What you did not yet understand, did not resolve, did not name, does not vanish. It is set down to be processed in another way. Softer, slower, often kinder. From the flow of the earlier parts from the opening universe, invisible forces, fragile life, the body as an ecosystem. Sleep emerges as a meeting place, where everything gathers without needing agreement, where questions are allowed to have no answers, where you no longer need to carry your story. There is a particular peace in realizing that sleep is not falling into emptiness. It is stepping into another room of the same house. The light is dimmer there. The sounds are quieter. But life is still present, quietly, patiently. If your thoughts are beginning to fragment now, it is not because you are losing focus. It is because the transition has begun. Consciousness is yielding, no ritual required, no signal needed, just a natural shift like water changing course at a bend. Sleep, not disappearance, but continuation in another form. And when you allow yourself to enter that continuation, you are not leaving anything important behind. You are letting it be held by the body, by the brain, by the night. No promises, no guarantees, only a very light trust that you may rest and the world will not collapse because of it. Let sleep arrive, not as a reward, not as a goal, but as an ancient instinct being reawakened, slow, warm, and safe enough for you to dissolve into it very quietly, the way life has always done when the night grows deep enough. As sleep begins to open its door, as consciousness no longer leads the way, as the body releases most of the day's weight, another space quietly appears. Dreams. Not as a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Not as a message that must be understood, but as a language without grammar where the rules of daytime are temporarily set aside. In dreams, time does not move in a straight line. Space does not need to be consistent. Characters can change form. Emotions can arrive before causes, and this is not a flaw. It is their nature. By day, the human mind operates through logic in order to survive. We sort, distinguish, predict. But at night, when that need eases, the brain allows itself to speak in another tongue, the language of images, associations, sensations. A language that does not aim to persuade, does not aim to transmit information clearly. It simply listens to itself. Dreams do not need logic because they do not serve the outer world. They serve inner balance. Sigmund Freud once wrote in The Interpretation of Dreams, "Dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, yet that road is not a straight one. It winds, it is misty, it sometimes turns back on itself. And when we try to illuminate it with the sharp light of logic, we often find ourselves lost." Dreams do not wish to be decoded by force. They wish to flow. From the previous part where sleep was seen as a transition, dreams emerge as the inner current of that transition. If sleep is entering another room of consciousness, then dreaming is how that room decorates itself. Without plan, without standards, only according to its own rhythm. In dreams, the brain tells stories to itself, not for entertainment, but to connect fragments of experience things. The day had no time to process emotions, left unattended, memories not yet named. In dreams, these elements do not need to stand in the right place. They only need to appear. Carl Jung once wrote, "Dreams are the guiding words of the soul." But guiding here does not mean giving clear directions. It is more like an underground current, not saying where to go, but quietly shaping the landscape above. When we understand dreams this way, we can stop trying to control them. There is a very modern habit of waking up and immediately asking, "What does this dream mean?" As if not understanding it means we have missed something important, but in the space of night, that question can be gently set down. Not everything meaningful needs to be translated into words. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent. Dreams belong to that region where daytime language is not soft enough to reach, and this silence is not a lack, it is a form of respect. No need to decode, only to drift. This is not advice to give up. It is a form of trust. Trust that the brain knows how to do its work. Trust that not everything requires conscious intervention. Trust that sometimes too much understanding only creates more knots. In dreams, you may encounter images that defy logic, a familiar road leading to a place you have never been, a loved one wearing another face, a sadness without a cause. By day, we would rush to correct them. By night, we can simply watch like watching clouds pass. No need to know why they take that shape, only to know that they are moving. From the flow of the earlier parts, from the vast universe to fragile life, to the body as an ecosystem, to sleep as a transition, dreams are the most subtle layer of motion. They do not aim to explain the universe. They reflect how the small universe within you is quietly arranging itself. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "In human, all too human." One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Dreams are where that chaos is allowed to exist without being cleaned away. And from there, not a star, but balance can be born. There is something deeply healing in allowing dreams to have no clear meaning. When we stop forcing stories to conclude, the mind is freed from the loop of searching for answers. It is allowed to play, to try, to be wrong. And in that freedom, tension dissolves. If at this moment you can no longer clearly distinguish between the spoken words and the images forming in your own mind, that is entirely natural. Perhaps dreams have already begun to seep in even as you are still listening. Two currents are blending, the dream of the storyteller and the dream of the listener. At that point of meeting, full alertness is not required. No need to follow the thread, only to remain with the sensation, like being inside a wordless piece of music, like floating in warm water. Dreams do not need logic. The mind tells stories in order to understand itself, and you do not need to do anything at all. Just allow the story to continue, not on paper, not in speech, but in the images slowly forming behind your eyelids. No need to remember them in the morning. No need to carry them with you. Dreams do not ask to be recorded. They only ask to be allowed. And when you allow that, very slowly, very quietly, consciousness can step back one more pace. Enough for you to dissolve into that current where there is no grammar, no demand, no test. Only the soft continuation of a mind caring for itself in the night through the most ancient language it knows, dreams. When dreams have finished their quiet work, when images without grammar dissolve like mist, something very subtle remains. Consciousness. Not the noisy consciousness of daytime, not the voice that constantly names itself, but a thinner, quieter presence. As if the universe were gently tilting its head to look at itself through a very narrow opening, and that opening in this moment is you. There is an idea that has accompanied philosophy and science for centuries, that human beings are a place where the universe observes itself. Not because we are special in a central sense, but because here within a fragile biological structure, matter has learned how to feel itself. Atoms that once drifted through stars now know how to think, how to question, how to listen to themselves in the night. Seen from far enough away, consciousness is not a throne. It does not command the universe. It does not issue orders to time. It simply appears as a phenomenon like light, like heat, like waves. And recognizing this does not make humanity smaller. It makes us lighter. By day, we often live as though consciousness were the center, as if everything revolved around the thinking I. But at night, after the earlier parts have softened the need for control from the vast universe to fragile life to the self-regulating body to sleep and dreams, consciousness can step back, not vanish, just relax. When consciousness steps back, something else becomes visible, a feeling of smallness without meaninglessness. Small because you are not the center of everything. Not meaningless because the very fact that you can feel this is itself a rare event in the universe, a place where matter does not merely exist, but knows that it exists. Baruch Spinoza wrote in Ethics, "The human mind is part of the infinite intellect of God." However one understands God here, the sentence carries a gentle image. Human consciousness is not separate from the whole. It does not stand outside the universe to observe it. It belongs to the universe like a ripple belongs to water. From the previous part, where dreams allowed logic to dissolve, this section continues by letting consciousness soften as well, not to lose the self, but to see that the self does not need to occupy the center in order to matter. It only needs to be present long enough for the universe to glimpse itself through a pair of very temporary eyes. There is something deeply healing about not being the center. When you are not the center, you do not have to carry all meaning. You do not have to explain everything. You do not have to be certain. You can share existence with countless others, stars, organisms, streams of time, without standing above or below them. Carl Sagan once said, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." Heard at night, the line loses its grandeur and becomes intimate. Like a whisper, you do not need to do anything more to be worthy. The fact that you are here sensing is already part of a very long process. Consciousness is not the center, but it is a window. Through that window, the universe does not seek answers. It simply experiences. It hears sound. It sees darkness. It feels fatigue and the need to rest. And when you allow yourself to sink into deep sleep, that window does not close. It merely dims like curtains drawn in a room. The philosopher Edmund Husserl spoke of consciousness as always being consciousness of something, intentionality. But at night, that something does not need to be clear. It can be warmth, breath, drift. Consciousness no longer searches for an object to hold. It floats with experience. From the flow of the entire journey, from releasing questions, accepting not knowing, observing without judgment, consciousness is returned to its proper place, not as commander, but as a temporary witness. And when the witness grows tired, the witness may rest. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in "The gay science to live is to suffer to survive, is to find some meaning in the suffering." But perhaps at night, meaning does not need to be found. It can be set down. And in setting it down, consciousness releases its tension, stops defining, stops gripping. If now you feel both present and dissolving at once, that is entirely natural. It is the sign of consciousness receding into the background, not disappearing, simply no longer occupying the foreground. Like lights in a room being dimmed so sleep can arrive, consciousness, what the universe does through us, not to dominate, not to understand everything, only to touch itself for a very brief moment in time. And when that moment closes for tonight, nothing is lost. The universe continues. Consciousness continues elsewhere in other forms, and you, in your very small and very sufficient role, may rest. Let consciousness drift backward like a retreating wave. No farewell needed, no punctuation required. Only a silence opening where you no longer need to observe because you yourself are being held by the very reality that gave rise to the ability to observe. And within that holding sleep arrives not as an ending, but as a full quiet pause in the journey the universe is telling through you. And now, as this journey gradually slows, not because it has reached an answer, but because there is no longer a need to go any further, you may sense something very light spreading through you. Not the emptiness of lack, but the emptiness of having set things down. The ideas about the universe, about life, about consciousness, they have completed their work. Not to be remembered, but to bring you here to a place quiet enough that no more thinking is required. You do not need to remember what you have heard. You do not need to arrange it into a system. You do not need to carry any conclusions into sleep. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." Yet that peace does not come from understanding more deeply, but from stopping the effort to understand. And in this moment, you are allowed to do exactly that. Allowed not to follow. Allowed to miss parts. Allowed to drift off midway without feeling that anything is lacking. There are stories that do not need an ending in order to be whole. They are completed when the listener no longer stays until the end. Not from indifference, but because they have arrived at the right place. If there is still something that remains unclear, let it stay where it is. There is no need to carry it with you. The universe does not ask you to hold everything. Only human beings tend to place that obligation upon themselves. And tonight, you may set that obligation down very gently, like placing an object you have held for too long onto a table, and then forgetting it is there. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Philosophical Investigations, "The solution of the problem of life is seen in the vanishing of the problem." Not because the problem is solved, but because the need to solve it disappears. Perhaps sleep arrives in the same way, not when every question has an answer, but when we no longer need the questions. This voice does not need to accompany you any further. It does not hold you. It does not close the door. It simply thins out, grows quieter, like a light being turned down very slowly so the room may choose its own darkness. You may leave at any moment. No notice required. No goodbye needed. And if you are still awake, that is fine. If you have already fallen asleep, that is fine too. This video does not require an ending. It does not place a period. It simply dissolves the way night has always dissolved into sleep, without drama, without announcement, only a gentle transition. Let sleep finish the rest. No effort needed, no attention required. Just allow everything to continue in the most natural way it knows. And in that continuation, very slow, very quiet, you no longer need to be the observer. You only need to be held.